Well, Juanita, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. How are you?
I am well. Thank you, Michael. Just finished a brisk walk and I'm ready to sit and be present to you now.
Awesome. Um, I've done quite a few of the interviews with this series, so I think I've probably done enough with explaining what the Enneagram is. So maybe we can jump straight into you giving the audience that maybe doesn't know as much about the Enneagram, kind of the makeup of a one.
Oh, wow.
in,
Well,
in, in
first of
two
all,
sentences or less. No, just kidding.
right, exactly. Well, I can do it by listing words: rule followers, compliant. Uh, let's see, what else can I tell you? The ones are often very much um, perfectionist. We're often driven by dualistic thinking. Things have to be black and white, or we believe they should be black and white. There shouldn't be any gray. And what do you mean there's a whole rainbow, a plethora of colors to break up our way of seeing life as good, bad, right, wrong? And so that kind of way of seeing causes us to often feel like we're carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders. We are the people who um, tend towards righteousness, which the downside of that kind of, uh, if you will, perception of high moral integrity. Not that there's a problem with high moral integrity. The challenge often is that we don't tend to offer a lot of grace when we find those rules are broken, when we find the integrity has been violated. Very judgmental, can be very condescending, and unfortunately, with the one, their harshest critic criticizes them the hardest. And so everybody else is just kind of experiencing, if you will, some of the overflow of the deep critical nature that the one tends to operate in. I hope that gives you some really heightened sense of what
Yeah,
it's like to be a one.
I think you went a little deep into it, but what it boils down to is if people didn't catch on, is ones are perfectionists, right?
We are. We are.
And
Matter of fact, let me tell you how it looks sometimes, Michael. My family and I were watching a movie, right? And I say, "Did you see that? Did you see that boom mic that was hanging down?" Nobody else saw the boom mic, but I saw the boom mic, right? And then of course we say, "But I'm absolutely right about this." And so I get them to replay the movie so we can see the part where I told them the boom mic was. Or you see in the movie the place where they have spliced the movie together and something was in one place and now it's in another place. That's the one. It
yeah,
can be
absolutely.
draining and tiring um, when we're at our most unhealthy side of being the one. But the world needs ones. That's the good news for us ones. Because you want a one as an accountant or your CPA. You want a one to create legislative policy. You want a one, an enlightened one, an awakened one, in places where being able to set a standard is important. And there are still places in our lives where setting standards is important.
That's good to hear as well. So obviously you are a one. So
Yeah.
and when I go to my good place, I start to become a one. I'm a four. I guess when you go to your
Oh,
bad
okay.
place, you go to the bad side of four.
Right,
um,
exactly, exactly.
so maybe you could share with us some of your journey. I know you shared it in the book as well, about learning to become how you be sorry, learn to become a one, or knew that you
Good.
were a one,
Yeah,
and kind of what that meant to you.
yeah. Well, Michael, it took place in a really critical point in my life. Um, in our 30s, and particularly probably between age 31 and about 37 or so, many of us can find ourselves in places where We have lived out our narrative, the paradigm of how we thought we would show up in the world. And, by the time I'm 35, I'll be this and I'll have that. And I'll be, it's all about doing, having, and then being. Well, for me, during that space where I was experiencing my own midlife crisis, which turned out to be a mental health crisis, I was diagnosed with a major depressive episode. My husband and I worked together as co-pastors of a church, St. John's downtown here in Houston. And our church had grown from a dynamic 9 to a fantastic, fabulous 3,500 people. And I was working harder because we ones strive, we work hard, we want the best of whatever we do, we want it to be its very best, right? And so I'm operating in that mode as a young mom, a young wife, a young pastor, and I blew a circuit, if you will. That narrative no longer served me. And so I woke up one morning and thought life was going to be normal, but it was far from normal. I ended up getting in bed and sleeping for weeks on end for 18 to 20 hours, then being diagnosed after about 2 weeks of having had a major depressive episode. Now, if you've never experienced a significant shift in your life where it felt like the rug got pulled from under your feet, if you never had a place where maybe there was a divorce or your dream blew up in your face or some kind of devastation, then you might not understand that kind of space that is total disorientation, where nothing about your life seems to offer support for what your life looks like it's becoming, right? And so it was in that space that I saw my spiritual director here in Houston and was seeing a therapist and a psychiatrist and came across the Enneagram. A workshop was being held here at the C.G. Jung Center here, Carl Jung Center here in Houston. And I thought, well, let me take this because my spiritual director had mentioned the Enneagram in a class. And I thought, okay, let me check this out. I walk into the room. They began to discuss the one on the Enneagram, and I felt as though I had been seen and known, and in the light of God's love, not in the condemning way that my inner critic would offer my identity as a one, but in a way that said, there's hope here, and you have a reason for being a one. And there are ways that you can learn to live into this oneness, and it will absolutely reveal an aspect of God, the divine love to the world. That got me when I found out that each of us on the Enneagram is here to represent an aspect of the presence of God, the divine. I was hooked ever since.
Sure. Excuse me. Um, yeah, what's not to get hooked about that, right? So,
Right, exactly. No matter how bad you might feel about yourself, to know that there's a reason that you're here and that the growth opportunity is to find out what it means to live as a healthy one.
absolutely. And everybody strives to be their healthy number. If everybody was their healthy number, then wouldn't it be a great place,
Oh
wouldn't
my goodness, wouldn't it be?
it? So, with that being said, and I think you might have even touched it a little bit when you were pointing out what a one is. But my question for you would be, what would you say is the hardest thing about being a one?
Hmm. I think I would have to go back to the fact that we're our harshest critics. That we can be very hard on ourselves before we even get out of bed. Good, we can be beating ourselves up with the things to do list that we forgot to do or weren't able to accomplish the day before, and here you are again dragging that project to this next day. And so we can be very difficult, um, hard with ourselves. And so I think when we begin to do the work that invites us to look at what it means to rewrite our individual narratives, because of course our oneness is totally woven in the story we tell ourselves, right? And so the invitation is to look for ways to free ourselves. I think so much of what the Enneagram offers all of us, no matter what our numbers, is it's offering us freedom. Freedom from a punitive narrative in the case of a one, freedom from punishment, freedom from a life filled with checking off a to-do list, but not a life filled with valuing experiences, gratitude, and joy. And so for me, one of the most liberating effects of looking at the Enneagram has been what it's like to now write a narrative that includes gratitude and includes and makes space for a lot of joy. Before I really began to kind of do this work, it was all about what's next. It was about do, have, and then you can be, right? What I'm learning is just the opposite. I'm learning how to be, and then that out of that being, I establish what activities I'll engage in, what I'll do, if you will, how I'm invited to engage in the world. And then I recognize I'll have what? The kind of life I've longed for. But the other way around leaves you empty. Often we can look back at our calendar and see what we've done, but we didn't know how we were. We didn't know how we lived. We didn't know if we'd experienced gratitude or joy or contentment. Um, and for too long, the fulfillment was in simply the task being accomplished. And golly, there's so much more to life than that, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, so, obviously, you have a successful church that you help pastor and found and develop. So your spiritual walk, I'm sure, must be good. But maybe you could tell me how understanding your number has helped you even more in that spiritual walk.
Oh man, let me tell you, one of the things that helped is that I kept wondering why my husband and I were so different as co-pastors. I mean, obviously he's a man, I'm a woman, but there were some other things, some other dynamics going on that I didn't quite understand. And so as I began to study more about the one, I came to realize that, well, first of all, I'll just say I'm an introverted one, but I act extroverted. All right. And so what that meant for me is that I would go to church with this strive hard, work hard, do more, get it done, overcome it. And, if your feelings get hurt, suck them up and move on. Right. And so all of that just literally wore me out. And what I had to realize is that I was an introvert, that I am a one, and that as a one, as a pastor, we're the people who want to make sure that the congregation is being taught solid doctrine, right? Um, my husband, on the other hand, is an 8 on the Enneagram, and he's a visionary leader. And that means that sometimes, he walks through a room and there's a whirlwind that happens.
Right.
And so I'm the one that goes, okay, let's all take a deep breath and the whirlwind will quiet down. And so it has been a gift in that we provide balance and harmony in how we are present to our congregation. But at the same time, I was having to learn how um, to be with my own innate nature to want to have silence and to honor solitude and to be alone so that I could then be with people. And so that was a real learning for me in finding that out. And it was somehow the Enneagram that helped me with that. I think it was just, it gave me some clarity around some things. It invited me to question, again, how am I showing up, question my narrative, the me that I saw, to pay attention to the me that others would see. And that was painful, you know, to see that others could easily see that I would be very judgmental. Um, that because for me everything was about being black and white. You know, you're either wrong or you're right. And I'm either wrong or I'm right. And I'm working darn hard to make sure I'm right, you know? Um, and to see how that can impact relationships, that people want to be heard and they don't want to feel judged. They don't want to feel condemned. And many of us, and I included, grew up with an image of God that was very judgmental. I wrote in my first book, Learning to Be, Finding Your Center After the Bottom Falls Out. And I talked about what it was like to grow up with a God who was a cross between Judge Judy and Santa Claus. And either one of them could mess up your Christmas. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And learning that God was neither of those, that was a God someone had given me, but that was not the God of my experience. That the God of my experience had been compassionate and had been graceful and gracious and had been loving and kind and present when I had been taught God was kind of out there somewhere, you know. So it's the Enneagram that's helped me to pay attention to my narrative and invited me to question what I've been believing and what I've been thinking about myself, about God, and about others. I hope that the Enneagram has helped me to be a more compassionate person. I think it has. Um, and when I'm at my best, I am that one.
Awesome. That's beautiful. Why don't we finish up with you telling everybody a little bit about well, let's get the right light here. 40 Days at Being a One, your latest
Oh
book from
my
IVP.
goodness. I love the process of writing 40 Days of Being a One. It was an opportunity during the highlight of COVID-19. We're assuming that much of the highlight is behind us,
I
right?
hope so.
That me, you and me both, right? That during COVID-19, that InterVarsity Press and my publisher and my editor Cindy Bunch asked me if I would consider writing a 40-day devotional, and I said absolutely. And so basically, I think I wrote it in about 90 days, which I don't think I've ever written anything that quickly besides maybe a sermon, but it was an opportunity to just be present with what was showing up in my life, you know, day after day, and to reflect on it as a one, because that's, you know, that's where I come from. And then to find and look for the grace. One of the things that I am learning is how to stay open to gratitude, to cultivating an attitude of gratitude. I find that for ones that is very important because otherwise we can begin to believe that we're totally self-sufficient, we're totally self-reliant, and we don't need anybody or anything else because we've got our wonderful systems, right? You know,
Hmm.
and our wonderful rules and our rules upon rules. Well, what I've tried to share in 40 Days on Being a One is an opportunity for us to see the vulnerabilities of a one, um, and how driven we can be with the narratives of our rules driving our lives, the necessity for cultivating gratitude, and how gratitude is the, the bedrock, if you will, for being able to hold joy. The gratitude becomes the container for joy, and joy is the missing link often for one. And then serenity or inner peace, knowing and learning to live with the diaspora of colors on the rainbow, if you will, that everything isn't black and white, and that some rules really are meant to be broken. And so learning to see what that means in our individual lives and in our communities and ultimately in our world. You know, the late Honorable Senator John Lewis said, um, for us to do some good trouble, get in some good trouble, right? And so this is a learning for ones that yes, there are times when we are called because of our desire for justice, because of our desire for what is right, that we are called to break some rules. And that, my friend, can be very troubling to a one. But we can learn how to be our healthiest one. And that healthiest one is one who's able to recognize that there are some injustices in the world, and they're written oftentimes as rules, and that we can often become the advocate for change, changing rules that don't serve the greater good, that don't empower compassion for humanity. And so, writing 40 Days on Being a One during COVID, during the social justice uprising, during a nation at its crux of being against each other, if you will, gave me a wonderful opportunity to look for joy. And so when I wrote 40 Days on Being One, I looked to cultivate gratitude in the writing. I looked to cultivate joy in the writing. Um, and I believe we've done some of it.
Well, amen. Juanita, thank you so much for writing the book, and hopefully it does do some of the things and works God's will into some of these ones so that they can experience a one of perfection instead of a one that goes to the dark side, I guess. And
Yeah,
thank you for taking the
yeah.
time to talk to us about it and sharing some of your life.
Michael, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much. Would you remind your audience that they can get 40 Days of Being a One? They can go to my website, juanitarasmus.com, or they can go to InterVarsityPress.com or any place books are sold. I am so grateful to have had this opportunity to be with you today.
All right. Well, thank you.